I've been a Christian Science Committee on Publication for about 7 years, little over then, and for Ontario. I'm also the federal representative for Canada. And I don't know if, I think probably most of you were able to see Anna Bonessa's excellent presentation this morning about answering questions on Christian Science. We chose this one, and I would consider it an imposition on the public with regard to Christian Science. However, in the way it's worded, it's really a straightforward statement. You know, and we've all heard it. You know, I'm spiritual. I'm not religious. It's not posed as a question. It's not posed as a comment about Christian Science that needs correcting, and yet it sort of hangs there. It's never a point of disapproval when you hear it. It's not something that I mean, if you live in Canada, we know we're all very polite up here, and we accept you for what you say you are, and so. So, in looking at that statement, I'm spiritual but not religious. The word that really sticks out for me is not. And so that for me, I thought I'm going to look into this, and because I wasn't really into maybe doing this one, but the more I got into it, the more it kind of presented itself as a pretty meaty subject. Also, today, language has been discussed. The idea that there's the thought often expressed that the Bible was written in a language that is dying, and will the language of science and health soon follow. And my sense of that is that language is so pictorial in its nature that you could look at the Bible as a book of pictures. So I want to step for a moment. I want to start in treating this question by just discussing the pictorial nature of language. But even before that, there's a little story that I read a couple weeks ago that I really enjoyed. A friend of mine is really bent on my learning Spanish, and she said, well, you should read this book by Paulo Coelho, because the language in it is so poetic. You will hear the Spanish language in its most poetic form. So I got the English translation of it. Anyway, here's the story, and I'll illustrate it. A Spanish missionary was visiting an island when he came across 3 Aztec priests. "How do you pray?" the missionary asked. "We have only one prayer," answered one of the Aztecs. "We say, 'God, you are 3, we are 3. Have pity on us.'" "A beautiful prayer," said the missionary, "but it's not exactly the one that God heeds. I'm going to teach you one that's much better." The padre taught them a Catholic prayer and then continued on his path of evangelism. Years later, when he was returning to Spain, his ship stopped again at the island. From the deck, the missionary saw the 3 priests on the shore and waved to them. Just then, the 3 men began to walk across the water toward him. "Padre, Padre," one of them called, approaching the ship, "teach us again that prayer that God heeds. We've forgotten how it goes." "It doesn't matter," responded the missionary, witnessing the miracle. And he promptly asked God's forgiveness for failing to recognize that he speaks all languages. I love that story. And because it speaks about the universal nature of spirituality, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. And the visual nature of I love this picture because you can tell the artist has a kind of a bias. This is actually a missionary who went through North America. I've gone and forgotten his name. And you can see that in this little tableau here, his head is about in the middle of the head feathers of the native fellow, and you've got this fellow here who's kind of looking back out at nature. You've got him holding his hand over the land. That's a sign of dominion, and this is a sign of bestowal. You know, in the language of the picture. Here you've got a kind of a clutchy, possessive-y kind of hand on the part of the native fellow there, and he seems to be giving the priest a lecture. But again, the priest's head is above his head, but his plumes, which his vanity, makes him appear to be sort of above the head of the priest. And this is all language that the artist has put into this picture. So the picture is doesn't just depict a supposed moment, because it was probably much different, but it's actually a little theological lesson. I'm going to compare it with this one. Really the same kind of tableau. And you have the hand of bestowal, the hand reaching up to heaven. Here you have the clutching fingers of Judas down here below. You've got, I don't know who that is sleeping here with the sword, but, "O thou dullard." You know, yeah, I think Doubting Thomas is actually back here, because he's got a halo, but he's below everybody else. You know, so again, the Sermon on the Mount probably didn't happen like this. But it's how it's depicted. And there's a little space made, of course, and look at this figure here is looking at you, the viewer, and there's a space. You can go right in. Just watch the person with the golf club. And always the finger of the child. There's always a child in paintings, and the finger is always sort of pointing like this. Of course, towards the Christ, and that has an obvious symbolism to it. So, language is very pictorial by nature, and we're all very good at reading visuals. That's the power of the Bible, or the pictures, when we do what I call go to Bible land, you're really working with the pictures. I was at the Sunday school presentation earlier, and they're talking about depicting stories in the Bible and how receptive children are to that. And I think that we're more receptive to the pictorialization of spiritual ideas than we are to words. And I'm saying all this for a reason, because the word spiritual and religious is very loaded. And it's almost, we use language in an undefined way. And the funny thing about Committee on Publication work is when the media decides that certain language is important, it gets published, and then we have to start really thinking about how words and how to answer questions and this sort of thing. Anyway. Everyone goes to Google these days, and to find answers to life's important questions. I like to go to Google Images. And one of the first things I did when I was going to prepare for this was to look up two words on Google. to see what the public is thinking. This is something about Google that if you want to get a sense of what the public is thinking, what the masses are thinking about any particular thing, go to Google, just type in a simple word like spirituality, see what you come up with in the images section. Have a look at this. There are pages and pages of this. Very little in the way of negative imagery concerning spirituality. And I find that a really positive thing. Mrs. Eddy said, spiritual teaching must always be by symbols. And she also says, if spiritual sense always guided people, if spiritual sense always guided men, there would grow out of ecstatic moments. You probably know this, it's from the prayer chapter. There's an infallibility about spiritual sense. Spiritual sense is the secret place of the Most High, you know, and yeah, if spiritual sense always guided men, there would grow out of ecstatic moments a higher experience and a better life with more devout self-abnegation and purity. I think we can agree with anybody who says, I'm spiritual. It's this part. Here's a Google search on religion, or religious. It's quite a different picture. And again, there's pages and pages of this under images. Religion is for people afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for people who have already been there. I like this one, the first church of whatever works for you. Imagine no religion. Bit of a cheap shot, I think. This is very creative here, the Greek Orthodox Church on the tank. And of course, religion and politics. Biggest conversation going on about religion, and probably, you know, so much of what appears, and you know this in the media about religion, is where it crosses paths with politics, or in the case of healthcare, its failures. Two journalists in Canada I've been in touch with recently who cover health. They're the health reporters, and I wanted to get to know them and meet them. We do that in a Committee on Publications. So both of them said, well, we generally comment on alternatives when there are problems. So there seems to be an appetite for the failure of religion, just as there is a hunger for spirituality. Do you really, has anybody really read or seen an item on television or in the paper that speaks ill of spirituality? There's not much. Sometimes there's some cynical things said about Eckhart Tolle, for example. But really, I think that instinctively, and this is a really hopeful thing, you know, instinctively, people do have a sense that spirituality is a sense. And it is that secret place of the Most High that we all have, whether we declare it in those terms or not. Religion is how it's practiced, and it's not always practiced very well. And when it's not practiced well, or if there's misunderstanding, it gets represented really badly. And it's my sense that spirituality and religion are two sides of the same coin. If there's any disagreement, let me know. I'm just sort of telling you my sense of it, you know, that we're never more religious. Well, our religious practice always expresses our sense of spirituality. And it's two sides of the same coin. If you look at a 25-cent coin, you know, it doesn't matter if you're looking at the head, if you're looking at the tail, both sides represent 25 cents. One side doesn't represent a different value than the other. So when Jesus, by your works shall ye know them. That is, spirituality is expressed in works, and the highest spirituality expresses the highest form of religion. The lowest form of spirituality expresses otherwise. There's a story about the Crusaders. When they would go, one of their tactics was to actually go into these countries and plant crosses above towns. And so the first cross was planted. It sat there for about a month. People wondered what it was about. And then the armies arrived and slaughtered everyone in the town. So each subsequent cross that's planted down the coastline has an increasingly demoralizing effect on people. So you plant a cross on the hillside, you wait a month, everyone knows what that means. They've heard the stories, and they weaken, and then they can be, picked off. So this was a tactic, and this was employing the symbol of the cross. As currency, it was maybe effective politically, but did it express spirituality? To what degree? And to what degree did it sort of, was it something completely divorced from spirituality? What was the other side of that coin? It wasn't religious. And I think a lot of what's depicted here and complaints about religion is actually a failure in terms of the expression of spirituality. Does that sound about right? I think probably one of the strongest symbols for religion is, of course, organized religion, structures such as this one. And when you compare that to what's popular about spirituality, it tends to have the effect of maybe making one feel a little small. Maybe that's one possible explanation for another aspect of religion that people don't connect with. However, might be interesting for you to point out here that this is actually the New York Stock Exchange. So take a moment and just be aware of how maybe your thought has changed suddenly, knowing that this is the New York Stock Exchange. Perhaps you want your money in there. And we do want strong institutions around that economy, safe money, safety, in a sense. We like this sort of thing in Canada. I know that there are some Americans here. It might be, in Canada or in the States, I think it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In Canada, it's peace, order, and good government. So there you have it. This is the tableau that's at the top of the New York Stock Exchange. Again, there's something very benevolent in the intent of this building. It's being announced, by the building. It's got a solid protective sense. It's stable. It's going to be here forever. It's good Greek architecture, and then the tableau. It's the intent of this economic system to support. You have children well represented. You have the labor, and you have an overseeing angel. So spirituality. Yes. If the Bible's a book of pictures, what's that element that seems to best express spirituality? Yeah? I haven't got pictures for that, though, so you have to give me the answer I want that I prepared for. Go ahead.
God is love.
Uh-huh. But as an image, spirituality closely associated often with water, right? Yeah. Rainbow's wonderful. Over water is best.
The sun.
Sunrise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sunset.
Mrs. Eddy makes much of water in her writing as well. River. I was looking at the definition of river. Channel of thought. When smooth and unobstructed, it typifies the course of truth. But muddy, foaming, and dashing, it is a type of error. So we have the sun represented there, you know. I think that this best describes sort of experiences with lesson sermon. There's a stillness about it. This to me expresses thought, and that thought of the river of pure water flowing from the clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God. And when we contemplate nature in this way, it sort of brings out that sense, doesn't it? Here's another sense of maybe it's a little over the top, but there is a kind of an adventurousness, I suppose, about it. Boys like that kind of spirituality. He's here because she said no. Sorry. So, religion. Religion's a variable, whereas spirituality is solid, as Mrs. Eddy discusses it. Religion's a little different. She says, human reason and religion come slowly to the recognition of spiritual facts, and so continue to call upon matter to remove the error which the human mind alone has created. She also talks about religious history repeats itself in the suffering of the just for the unjust. So religion then, again, as an expression of spirituality, seems to be a variable. As expressed in human activity and behavior, it can express a better or worse sense of spirituality. She talks about the religion of the Pharisees, and the Bible advises us on the best kind of spirituality that we can practice. Pure religion, and this is from James, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction and to keep himself unspotted from the world. Here we come to church. Spiritual but not religious. I'm going to say Christian Science style, because I wonder if some of us have heard the argument that, well, Mrs. Eddy didn't really want to found a church anyway. I mean, do you hear variations on that? I'd like to hear some.
They just had an article in the journal from the archive from Michael Davis, I think, saying that she did intend to start a church.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading that they, at the point at which she realized a church was necessary, there were quite a group of men, as I recall, who wanted a publishing society, who thought that the only thing that really needed was for Christian Science to be published. But she was very strong in holding to her inspiration from God that no, a church was needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in a sense, what I'm really getting at is, and because what I've kind of discovered through this is that I'm actually quite profoundly religious. But that's a bit of a pat on the back, because that also says I'm profoundly spiritual, and thank you. I think that because you can't separate the two, I think that the question for us sometimes comes with church, and that is the activity that we engage in together and the organization. What's sometimes cited is are a couple passages on organization that Mrs. Eddy wrote in Proseworks. Despite the prosperity of my church, it was learned that material organization has its value and peril, and that organization is requisite only in the earliest periods in Christian history. After this material form of cohesion and fellowship has accomplished its end, continued organization retards spiritual growth and should be laid off. Even as the corporeal organization deemed requisite in the first stages of mortal existence is finally laid off in order to gain spiritual freedom and supremacy. I'm heading in a good direction on this, by the way. And here's one more. When students have fulfilled all the good ends of organization and are convinced that by leaving the material forms thereof a higher spirituality is won, then is the time to follow the example of the alma mater. Material organization is requisite in the beginning, but when it has done its work, the purely Christly method of teaching and preaching must be adopted. She's talking about organization. And what I find interesting is the question of institution. And there's a difference between organization and institution. Organization is a coming together of people, isn't it? It's by a mutual consent. Institution's different. She uses the word institution in her definition of church in the Glossary of Science and Health. Church, the structure of truth and love, whatever rests upon and proceeds from divine principle. The church is that institution which affords proof of its utility and is found elevating the race, rousing the dormant understanding from material beliefs to the apprehension of spiritual ideas and the demonstration of divine science, thereby casting out devils or error and healing the sick. The church is that institution. An institution, by definition, is by decree. An institution is by decree. Human institutions may be by decree of organizations, but the interesting thing about this kind of institution, proceeding from divine principle. Here's the correlative passage. We love our correlative passages, so here we are. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they say, some say, "Thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." He's virtually saying you rest upon and proceed from divine principle, don't you think? Christ is the instituted. Christ is divinely authorized by decree. And our church is founded on that. Our church is instituted. It's not an organization of people. So I love those moments when people get out the manual and they do this. But this is from the at the very front of the manual is an extract from a letter in Miscellaneous Writings. The rule rules and bylaws in the manual of the First Church of Christ Scientist, Boston, originated not in solemn conclave, as in ancient Sanhedrin. How'd I do, Pat? Good, thank you. They were not arbitrary opinions nor dictatorial demands such as one person might impose on another. This is not organizational. They were impelled by a power not one's own, were written at different dates and as the occasion required. They sprang from necessity, the logic of events, from the immediate demand for them as a help that must be supplied to maintain the dignity and defense of our cause. Is it a stretch? Are you catching the, you're clear? Are any questions about that? About my sense of that? Whatever. Oh, boy. Whatever. She chose her words so carefully. And I think for her to throw out whatever like that, she does it on two occasions. I forget where the other one is, but it's equally delightful. It's just expresses such a freedom. I mean, church is whatever rests upon and proceeds from divine principle. Do you rest upon and proceed from divine principle? Do I? Does your dog? You know, it's an odd view of church, but that word, you know, she didn't choose her words loosely. And witness. In looking into this question of spiritual, not religious, these are the main words that came up. And witness came up last for me. There's a lot that's made of witnessing. I love this. This speaks so much to the idea of spirituality. Stand by the limpid lake, sleeping amid willowy banks dyed with emerald. See therein the mirrored sky and the moon ablaze with her mild glory. This will stir your heart. Then, in speechless prayer, ask God to enable you to reflect God, to become His own image and likeness, even the calm, clear, radiant reflection of Christ's glory, healing the sick, bringing the sinner to repentance, and raising the spiritually dead in trespasses and sins to life in God. That is from Miscellany, page 150, line 15. And you see how she starts out with spirituality? Stand by the limpid lake. And she ends with bringing the sinner to repentance and raising the spiritually dead in trespasses and sins to life in God. That's religion. You can't separate the language in this paragraph. You know, spirituality has its outcome, has the other side of its coin, and expresses the value. This is another image that I like for its, it has to do with I'll just read it here. It's from Revelation 22. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, there was the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. I don't know, there's a kind of a unity of that, in that of spirituality, religion, and also of church, the idea of what proceeds from and rests upon divine principle. I just wanted to show you this picture, the Sanhedrin. That's, I kind of, when she says in the manual, this was not where this manual has come from. This is not the kind of organization we're talking about. It's an awfully large board of directors. So, when we look at the commandments that Jesus emphasized, because of course he did say a new commandment, but really both commandments are in portions of the Old Testament, and that is, of course, love God and your neighbor as yourself. And again, he gave only those two commandments, and you see that love God is our spirituality, loving our neighbor as ourselves, our religion. And, coming full circle to that expression of I am spiritual but not religious, I think that the sympathy with that, I think that it has to do with valuing both our spirituality and just being aware that true religion is the expression of that spirituality, and is happening now with everybody, even those who declare that. It's just a mistaken language, really. We all make it. It's a terminology mistake, because I don't think it's really possible to call yourself a coin that is a head but no tail. Are there any questions? Comments?
Brilliant.
Thank you. I just wanted to show you, during my work, the Committee on Publication work, how do I close this down here? These Macs,
Perfect.
Yeah, I know. I'm about to get one. Yeah. Oh, here we are. Close it. There we go. This was a video that I made about church, and it was about a year ago. And it's really just sort of a contemplation piece on church and I'd like to leave you with that. Okay, just like yesterday. I wonder if Doug's here. Doug? Oh, you're here. Okay, good. Oh, I see. I'm trying to up the volume. Is anybody here good with Max? Because you're not leaving till you see this. What's that? Top right of the keyboard. Yeah, that's why it keeps closing and opening and closing and opening, is I've been clicking on that. Boy. Okay.
It'll just disappear.
Oh,
There's supposed to be music?
yeah, music and voice and the whole thing.
You don't have a mute going, do you? Oh, no. No, that doesn't work.
Okay. Is Stuart around? It could be. All right.
Do you have any icons in the top right that we can't see?
Yeah.
There should be a speaker in this.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah,
Let's see this one.
See that
That's memory.
it's,
You realize that people phone me about this stuff?
it would just be a
Yeah,
volume.
it's not there? Yeah, it ought to be, in some drop-down.
Play.
Yeah, should be on.
Should be hearing it on your
Yeah.
Say what they're saying.
Eric, I think it's because you've got your video going, to the projector, but unless you have audio going out,
It could be, yeah.
it's not going to play.
Oh, I see, yeah. Okay. Well, that's it then.
We can watch it. Unplug it, we can watch it on computer.
Yeah. I suppose. Yeah.
You just narrated.
Oh, there you go. Personal narration.
Oh, gee, I need music and every, oh. You're not Stuart.
No.
We don't have any volume.
Yeah.
So. Did you want it to go?
I'm glad you're doing that.
Is this what you want to go?
Yeah. But there's no sound.
Yeah, just saying. Oh, you're not linked for sound, that's why. You're only linked for video.
Okay. But, so it won't come out of the MacBook.
Sorry, I'm not a.
You know, as each minute passes, people are saying, this better be good.
Doug, is this still sound here? No, we're getting feedback from that. You don't want to try it on his computer? Okay, everybody, plug your ears. We tried it on his computer. On this one? Yeah. It was no good? It was doing the same thing. We can plug it in for you, but she's going to be crackled. Hang on.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do, but for some reason, it's not coming out of the speaker at all.
Does anyone know where Stuart is?
This Stuart, no.
That's Stuart. Do you want to run and get him, Doug?
Actually, I don't know where he is.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Check upstairs.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah,
While we're waiting,
yeah.
tell me what the Canadian slogan was again.
Oh, peace, order, and good government. Yeah.
Charter of Rights says rights, liberty, and security of person.
Oh, yeah, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
So what is it that you're saying?
Oh, I'm saying from earlier than that.
What, GNA or?
Yeah, British North America Act. Yeah. It's interesting, the guy who drafted the Canadian Charter of Legal Rights and Freedoms was a great friend of Christian Science. He was Senator Arthur Roebuck. And anyway, just a sidebar. Yeah. Okay. I'm looking for more to talk about, so. Hi, Stuart. What? Oh, you press control. Oh, good, good. Oh, Doug's gone. There was Mike. Here, use this.
Is a church really contained by walls? Inside are the caretakers of something that does not exist outside. Can anyone draw a circle around what is true and say, here, but not there? Inside is one set of rules and outside is another. And does sitting inside make you an exclusive owner of the message received there? Or is a church more like a public park, Everything in this garden grows everywhere. We don't have to come here to see the water flow, to hear the birds, or a breeze through the trees. These belong to no one. They belong to everyone. The only difference between this park and everywhere else is that we come here purposefully to appreciate, pause, reflect, think, to celebrate what is and the way things are, and to bring ourselves into harmony with natural patterns and to recognize ourselves in them.
That's the other whatever.